I used to believe that my life was a steady march forward, that each day would bring new energy, new drive, a clear sense of purpose pushing me onward. But somewhere along the way, I noticed something subtle yet unsettling. A quiet retreat inside myself, like a part of me was slowly dimming. It wasn't a sudden shift, no dramatic moment that announced it was happening. Instead, it was small cracks accumulating over time, the mornings when I woke up already fatigued, the times I found myself hesitating where I used to act, the ache of mental exhaustion even when nothing felt objectively overwhelming. I could still go through the motions, get up, work, fulfill my responsibilities. But the fire I once carried felt muffled, like it was hiding behind an invisible barrier I couldn't quite tear down. At first, I chalked it up to being busy, stressed, maybe even getting older. Who wouldn't slow down with age? But that explanation didn't sit right with me. I've seen men younger and older than me carry themselves with energy and boldness that seemed out of reach for me now. It wasn't about genetics or sheer willpower. There was something more beneath the surface. Something that slipped past everyday awareness, something rooted in patterns too familiar to question. I started paying attention to the moment-by-moment choices I was making. How often was I reaching to distract myself rather than engage? How often had I been choosing the path of least resistance instead of leaning into discomfort that might bring growth? I realized those weren't just random decisions. They were part of a deeper system I hadn't fully understood. The truth was, I had been conditioned, trained over the years to avoid risk, confrontation, and intensity. It wasn't that I was weak or broken. It was that my body and mind had learned to conserve energy by stepping back from the very things that might have sparked that fire again. This conditioning wasn't a punishment. It made perfect sense from the perspective of survival. If you repeatedly face danger or stress without a way to resolve it, your nervous system eventually rebalances to protect you, dialing down motivation, lowering focus, and muting presence. But what happens when this protective response starts to mute not just fear, but your vitality? When does the system meant to keep you safe slowly siphon away your essence, your strength, your initiative? I realized this was happening to me, quietly, persistently, almost invisibly. Every time I took the easy option, avoided discomfort, or numbed myself with distractions, my internal compass shifted just a bit further away from the kind of man I wanted to be. The world around me was filled with these subtle cues pushing toward comfort over challenge, calm over conflict, routine over wildness. I wasn't alone in feeling this. So many of us, without meaning to, get caught in this web, and it doesn't just affect how we feel. It reaches deeply into our biology, influencing hormones, focus, and energy. I remember a night not long ago, sitting in my quiet room, the day's clutter behind me but my mind restless. I caught myself thinking, when did I stop feeling like myself? When did the simple act of moving forward feel like a battle I didn't want to fight? That question lingered, stirring a mix of frustration and sadness. But it was also the beginning of something else, a clarity. What I thought was an irreversible decline felt, suddenly, like a chapter one could understand and rewrite. This isn't a story about blaming myself or falling into despair. It's about uncovering a hidden truth that many men don't talk about. The slow, steady erosion of that vital energy we all have inside. It's about recognizing the signs that something inside has been switching off, and that this isn't a reflection of weakness, but a response to the world we've been living in. And more than that, it's about the possibility, the real potential to turn that off switch back on. I'm inviting you into this conversation because I know you've felt it too. That quiet fading, that restless hesitation, the weight of mental fatigue that drapes over your shoulders. There's a story behind it, a pattern that's been shaping your experience, even if you weren't fully aware of it. And there's a way forward, not one that demands you become a different person, but one where you remember who you truly are beneath all of it. As we step deeper into this journey, I want you to hold onto this moment, the moment you realize that what's dimmed inside you is not lost forever. It's been only temporarily muted by forces that shaped you. The path ahead is about waking up that buried part, peeling back layers of conditioning that no longer serve you, and reclaiming the energy and presence that are your birthright. And so, from this place of honesty and awakening, we begin. I remember a night when exhaustion weighed heavy on my shoulders. Not just physical tiredness, but a deep-rooted sense of disconnection. I sat alone on my porch, a chilly breeze skimming over my skin, and noticed the silence within myself wasn't empty but crowded with unspoken fears and unacknowledged habits. It struck me then that so many of the habits I carried were like invisible chains forged by constant avoidance. For years, I had been edging away from emotional intensity, confusing it with danger, and dismissing it as weakness. Yet, every time I shied away, a part of me retreated deeper into stillness, as if waiting for permission to awaken. One vivid memory stands out: a heated debate at work where my instincts urged me to contribute, to challenge the status quo, but instead, I swallowed my words. I caught myself shrinking inside my chair, wishing to dissolve into the background. It wasn't just hesitation. It felt like my voice had been muted over time by countless earlier choices to stay safe. That evening illuminated a haunting truth for me. Retreating from difficult conversations hadn't shielded me from discomfort. It had quietly hollowed my presence and dulled my impact. What fascinated me next was uncovering how modern comforts, technology, and the constant pull of distraction had sculpted these retreating patterns. Notifications, scrolling endlessly, and the lure of superficial wins trained my nervous system into a state of passive waiting. Imagine it like a river once wild and rushing. Moment by moment, it slows, deposits silt, and eventually becomes stagnant, losing its life-giving force. Similarly, when we surrender our attention to fleeting diversions, our mental landscape becomes overgrown with inertia and hesitation. Yet, it's more than just habits, it's a subtle rewiring of how we interact with ourselves. I learned to listen to the quiet signals my body was giving off. A tightening in my chest before an opportunity, a dull ache after prolonged inactivity, an inner whisper that I wasn't fully present. These sensations, once ignored, began revealing a deeper story about the internal dialogue I'd allowed to dominate. Better not risk failure. Comfort is safer. Not now, maybe later. I recognized these as echoes of protective programming, not absolute truths. The revelation was profound. By accepting these scripts unchallenged, I was endorsing my own diminishing potential. One afternoon, I decided to test this awareness in a tangible way. Walking through a city park, I noticed a group engaged in an intense pickup basketball game. Something about their raw competitiveness stirred something dormant inside me. Despite years away from sports or physical challenge, I felt a surge of longing to participate, to feel alive in my body with purpose and exertion. When I finally joined in, fumbling over unfamiliar moves, I was flooded with sensations I hadn't felt in years. Exhilaration, frustration, and a fierce desire to push through discomfort. The next day, I woke with a renewed sense of clarity and a hunger to reclaim control over my own impulses rather than letting hesitation rule. This experience taught me that disconnection from our masculine vitality isn't just a function of mind. It's deeply embodied. When we resist demanding moments, physical exertion, and emotional exposure, the cells inside us begin adapting to this quieter existence. This adaptation, in turn, whispers to our hormonal system to dial down signals associated with drive, confidence, and assertiveness. Understanding this intimate connection between body and mind shifted my perspective profoundly. It became clear I wasn't fighting just mental blocks. I was engaging in a dance with my entire biological system, inviting it to re-engage with vitality through deliberate challenge. Unlike conventional advice promising quick fixes, I realized this process required patience and layered commitment. It meant recognizing and challenging the subtle routines that trusted safety over growth, the gradual withdrawal into passive observation. I began to embrace discomfort not as enemy but as a doorway, whether through physical endeavors, honest conversations, or moments of self-reflection that demanded candor and courage. Each step toward leaning into tension felt like shaking off an accumulated fog, freeing the raw essence that had been dimmed but never extinguished. One evening, I shared this journey with a close friend who nodded knowingly. He remarked, "It's strange how we tell ourselves we're doing fine, but inside, the weight keeps growing." That simple acknowledgement made me realize how widespread this hesitation really is among men. There's an unspoken collective narrative of endurance mixed with withdrawal, a quiet acceptance of reduced vitality as inevitable. Yet, in genuine connection and shared vulnerability, this story has the potential to be rewritten one conscious choice at a time. Now, consider how this applies when you face uncertainty or pressure. Do you feel your body tighten, your breath shorten, your instinct to engage retreat? These are signposts. You're not meant to run endlessly from sensations that scare or challenge you. Instead, you can learn to meet them, lean into the stretch, and awaken dormant strength. The pattern of running toward comfort has its roots in survival, but your future unfolds in the courageous reclaiming of your full presence. The journey is neither simple nor comfortable, but as I discovered through peeling back layers of my behavior and sensory experience, true renewal springs from embracing rawness and discomfort in the physical and emotional realms. The path isn't about becoming someone else. It's about restoring the creator within you who chose life fully, refused quiet acquiescence, and embraced the pulse vibrating beneath hesitation. In stepping toward that, you give yourself permission to be fully alive again. There was a moment when I sat beneath a heavy sky, rain tapping rhythmically against the window pane, and I found myself resting with an unfamiliar sensation. Not just weariness, but a profound numbness settling across my senses. It wasn't a sensation I could easily shake or name. As I traced the contours of that feeling, I realized it wasn't simply a lack of motivation. It felt more like a dull encasing, a protective shell that had formed to shield me from the discomfort of failure and rejection. That night, I confronted an unsettling truth. I wasn't just exhausted. I was retreating into an emotional bunker, barricading myself against risk under the guise of self-preservation. Later, I recalled a stark day at a family gathering where laughter and energy buzzed around me. Yet my spirit felt boxed in, isolated. When a cousin challenged me on my inability to pursue certain goals with vigor, my response was a quiet admission. I don't even know where to start. Those words haunted me. This was not a man lacking dreams. It was a man paralyzed by silent forces, unsure how to crack open the cage he'd carefully constructed. Until then, I had overlooked how deeply my environment and subtle messaging had siphoned away not only my ambition but also my instinctive confidence. I remember trying to pinpoint the exact triggers that made me shrink. It became clear that mundane moments, the endless consumption of passive entertainment, the compulsive checking of devices, the surrender to instant gratification, functioned less as refuge and more like invisible drains on my vitality. Once, I observed a young man in a cafe, engrossed in his phone, oblivious to the stunning sunlight streaming through the high windows. The contrast between his lifeless posture and the vibrant world beyond underscored a profound disconnect I hadn't fully acknowledged in myself. It drove me to question how the slow accumulation of minor distractions can compromise our capacity to be fully present, alert, and engaged. My curiosity pushed me to test a new approach. I decided to spend an entire weekend unplugged, purposely avoiding all screens and digital interruptions. Initially, I felt unsettled, my mind darting anxiously toward habitual windows of escape that were no longer available. Yet as hours slipped by, a curious clarity emerged. Stripped of constant diversion, my senses sharpened. I could hear nuances in birdsong, notice the interplay of shadows on walls, and feel the subtle rhythms of my own breathing. It was as though a fog had lifted, allowing a more primal part of me to reemerge. Alert, aware, waiting to reconnect with purpose and drive. This experience revealed something vital. To regain our inner fire, we often need to reclaim moments of stillness without distraction, permitting the body and mind to recalibrate and revitalize. There was also a completely different revelation during a late-night conversation with an old mentor. His voice was steady, infused with wisdom earned through countless struggles. Self-discipline, he said, doesn't mean repression. It means choosing yourself over every whisper that wants to derail you. Energy isn't lost because you're tired. It's depleted when you surrender control. Those words struck a chord deep within. I realized I had been confusing surrender with rest. Rest replenishes, surrender drains. Our culture often blurs the two, mistaking busyness or avoidance for strength, when true resilience lies in conscious choices aligned with deeper values. One afternoon, I took a reflective hike along a rugged trail, each step demanding mindfulness and commitment. Halfway through, my calf cramped fiercely, tempting me to stop and settle back into comfort. At that exact moment, I felt something shift inside, a stubborn refusal to yield to the impulse to quit. Pushing ahead, despite the burn, rewired my relationship not only with pain but with my internal narrative. I wasn't defined by ease or struggle but by how consistently I showed up and embraced discomfort without apology. That moment crystallized for me that reclaiming vitality requires not just bursts of willpower but cultivating steady resolve. I also began journaling with precise intention, jotting down daily moments when I felt most alive and moments I recoiled. This practice exposed patterns I had never consciously examined. For instance, noticing that my energy wildly fluctuated depending on whom I spent time with and what topics consumed my focus. Recognizing that certain environments and conversations nourished my strength while others depleted it, I started curating my interactions more deliberately. Protecting my energy became an act of self-respect rather than selfishness. Deeper still, I discovered that connecting with raw, unfiltered emotion opened a reservoir of authenticity I had long neglected. Allowing myself to feel anger, disappointment, and desire without judgment revealed that those emotions weren't enemies but signals guiding me back to my core self. A sudden outburst toward a close friend, followed by honest dialogue, strengthened bonds that superficial exchanges never could. This process released stagnant tension and reignited my capacity for passionate engagement, not only outwardly but inside, with my own ambitions and identity. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter resistance. Whether it's declining motivation at work, a faltering relationship, or aching physical fatigue. That internal barricade of avoidance and distraction might be whispering seductively, inviting you to settle for less. Yet, beneath that whisper, your true self waits, patient but persistent, ready to reclaim your full vitality. It's a call to step gradually into challenge, intentionally organizing your world to favor presence over passive comfort. It's an invitation to redefine discipline as liberation, courage as presence, and energy as a sacred resource you protect and nurture daily. In this process, I found that small, consistent decisions, turning off a device, pressing through discomfort during exercise, speaking truth even when awkward, accumulate powerfully over time. Like sparks catching dry tinder, these choices kindle momentum, transforming invisible patterns into tangible, unshakable strength. Each act of presence, each moment of deliberate engagement, rewrites the script etched into my biology and psyche, restoring the dynamic drive so many of us thought irrevocably lost. The first time I truly recognized the invisible walls closing in around me was during an unexpected encounter in a gym I barely visited. I was watching a group of men push themselves through grueling sets, their muscles straining, sweat dripping down their faces with fierce determination. One man caught my eye. His movements were raw and unapologetic, every rep a declaration of presence. Something stirred deep within me, a mixture of envy and awe. I realized that despite years passing by filled with routine and safety, a vital spark inside still longed to reclaim its place. Later that week, I found myself trying to mirror that intensity. But it wasn't as simple as replicating exercises or pushing harder. Instead, I stumbled into a more profound challenge, confronting the inertia rooted within my habits of thought. My mind, conditioned to avoid conflict and discomfort, insisted on narrating excuses. "Wait until you're ready," it whispered. "Tomorrow will be better." Each phrase was a thin veil covering a louder truth. I was resisting the discomfort that growth demanded. It dawned on me that breaking free meant dismantling the mental patterns scripted by years of cautious conformity. One evening, I chose to test this boundary by stepping into a local boxing class. A discipline foreign to me, unpredictable and demanding immediate response. As gloves wrapped around my fists and the bell rang, I faced the flickering panic that came when moving fast in unfamiliar territory. My heart sped as punches flew, forcing me to react rather than retreat. In that moment, raw vulnerability surged through me, mingled with exhilaration. Though clumsy and exposed, I discovered a thread of authenticity beneath the fumbling. It was as if my instincts, long muffled, began stretching toward freedom. What struck me most was how this physical confrontation illuminated overlooked emotional dimensions. Punching a heavy bag revealed suppressed frustration, years of tension I hadn't allowed myself to experience fully. The rhythmic impact felt like a release valve blasting open blockages that no meditation or distraction had reached. When I caught my breath afterward, a bittersweet clarity washed over me. Avoidance had been a whispered thief stealing moments of living, convincing me that safety equaled silence and withdrawal. Recalling a late-night talk with my younger brother, I shared this awakening. He laughed, admitting he'd been stuck in similar cycles, caught between comfort's tempting ease and the raw call of challenge. His words echoed something I'd often resisted. There's courage in showing up, even when you don't feel invincible. That night, we vowed to hold each other accountable, to meet discomfort head-on and refuse safe numbness. This pact wasn't about heroic leaps but steady steps out of the fog of hesitation. The metaphor of an overgrown garden comes to mind. Years of neglect allow weeds, patterns of avoidance, to choke out vibrant growth. Yet, with each small act of resistance, each moment I chose to lean into unease instead of shrinking, I pulled roots of stagnation from my psyche's soil. The task wasn't glamorous nor swift but profoundly grounding, fostering resilience seated in reality. Now, when discomfort creeps in, I listen closely instead of fleeing. It's a signal, not a sentence, inviting me to expand my boundaries. I also discovered that reclaiming my presence demanded clear rituals to counterbalance societal lullabies promising easy distraction. One morning ritual, in particular, became a cornerstone. Facing the sunrise with deliberate breathwork, anchoring myself in sensation, weaving awareness through every limb. This practice awakened a palpable sense of readiness to meet the day's challenges without retreat. Simple yet transformative, it reminded me each dawn that vitality is cultivated through consistent choice and attentiveness, not accidental grace. In a recent conversation with a colleague, I uncovered a related insight. He described feeling trapped within an endless cycle of pleasant numbness accelerated by digital conveniences, yet simultaneously yearning for something deeper, more real. We laughed over shared admissions of scrolling hours away from restless dissatisfaction. It was a subtle yet profound reminder that while our surroundings often encourage dulled existence, the impulse toward engagement burns quietly beneath, waiting to be coaxed into life. Now, consider how moments of resistance shape your journey. When you face hesitation that tempts withdrawal, what sensations ripple through you? How does that impulse challenge the story you've told yourself about who you are and what you're capable of? I invite you to view these moments as gateways, openings to a vitality simmering beneath inertia's surface. Each deliberate breath, conscious step forward, and small act of defiance against ease rewrites the narrative etched in your muscle memory, fostering a presence that cannot be ignored or diminished. In embracing this challenge, the layers of insulation built over years begin peeling back, like bark shed to reveal fresh growth beneath. The man I am becoming doesn't escape fear or discomfort but dances with them, understanding these sensations as integral to becoming fully alive again. The path forward gleams with hard-won clarity. Restoration is not a destination but an unfolding, fueled by courage sown in the trenches of everyday choice. Reflecting on this journey so far, I find myself standing at the crossroads of revelation and transformation, sensing a subtle shift in the air, a tension between what has been unveiled and what still lies ahead. It's as if I have wandered through a dense forest of quiet truths, each step revealing a different shade of shadow and light, and now I stand in a clearing where the pieces begin to intertwine in unexpected ways. The disparate threads once frayed and scattered are weaving together, forming a complex tapestry that pulses with an energy I hadn't fully grasped before. There's a curious harmony emerging, an intricate balance between resistance and acceptance, between vulnerability and strength. I feel as though I have been both the sculptor and the clay, shaping the contours of my own presence while simultaneously being reshaped by forces subtle yet relentless. It's a delicate dance. Sometimes I lead with determination, sometimes follow with surrender, but through each movement, I recognize an unfolding pattern that transcends mere change. This pattern is more like a pulse, a rhythm that beats beneath the surface, inviting me to attune myself to its cadence. In quiet moments, I notice how the seemingly small decisions, the ones that ripple quietly beneath consciousness, have gradually recalibrated my sense of self. Each choice nudges me toward a reclaiming of something essential, a reclamation not forged by sudden epiphany but by patient persistence. It strikes me that this process resembles the slow unfurling of a bud beneath winter's frozen shell, fragile yet resolute in its promise. The tension between the restraint of habit and the yearning for renewal creates a fertile tension, much like the pressure that precedes a breakthrough crack in stone. I often recall a scene from the early days of this awakening, sitting in a dimly lit room where silence was both companion and challenge. The stillness was uncomfortable, almost unbearable, because it stripped away distractions that once concealed the dormant currents swirling inside me. Yet, in that very discomfort, I glimpsed a quiet power stirring, the possibility of presence unencumbered by familiar illusions. It was as if the mind, freed from noise, began to sense the contours of something deeper, an unspoken invitation to lean into the unknown spaces within. There's a paradox in these internal invitations. Though the impulse to retreat into ease is strong and seductive, the yearning for authentic engagement whispers with equal insistence. I find myself drawn to that tension, standing between the impulse to fold in and the courage to expand outward. The experience is akin to holding one's breath just before a dive into turbulent water. There is hesitation, anticipation, and a vital energy coalescing in that suspended moment. The decision to leap or linger carries weight far beyond the immediate, resonating through the very fabric of my being. I have realized that the rhythms governing this internal landscape are not foreign laws imposed upon me but rather emergent patterns, responses emerging organically to signals I may have overlooked or misunderstood. This insight brings a kind of kindness to the process, replacing harsh judgment with compassionate curiosity. It reminds me that the body and mind are partners in a subtle dialogue, each responding to cues with quiet wisdom that deserves attention and respect. The notion of struggle softens into one of partnership, and resistance reveals itself as an invitation to listen more closely. In navigating these currents, I find myself learning a new language, a dialogue between anticipation and patience, between the urge to act and the wisdom to wait. This language is spoken not in words but in sensations, the tightening of breath, the quickened pulse, the deepening steadiness of posture. It informs decisions as much as thought does, shaping an embodied awareness that transcends purely intellectual understanding. Through this embodied dialogue, the contours of possibility bend and expand, revealing corridors of growth previously obscured. I think of a moment walking along a deserted shoreline, the expanse of ocean before me vast and inscrutable, the horizon a blurred invitation. The waves crashed and receded, relentless in their cyclical embrace, and I felt a kinship with their oscillation, the surrender to force and the triumph of emergence. That restless rhythm mirrors the inner oscillations we endure, the ebb of doubt and the flow of trust, the pull of resignation and the push of reawakening. In embracing this fluidity, I sensed a profound truth, not in fixed destinations but in the motion itself, the continual becoming. As I move through this inquiry, I sense a gathering momentum, a quiet readiness taking shape beneath the surface ripples of uncertainty. It feels less like an arrival and more like the gathering of breath before a long, deliberate exhale. This moment, pregnant with potential, encourages me to open my senses wider, to prepare myself for the unfolding that demands courage without guarantee. The way forward is hinted at by the very tension that both entices and unsettles, beckoning me to engage with an unfolding story that pulses with possibility. There is, in this poised space, an invitation to claim presence fully, not as an achievement stamped in time but as an ongoing journey with all its contradictions and complexities. It calls for heartfelt honesty, a gentle ruthlessness in shedding worn patterns, and an unwavering commitment to encounter the self with fresh eyes. In this embrace of both shadow and light, I sense the contours of a transformation more authentic than any scripted change, something elemental, raw, and deeply invigorating. Within this quiet convergence of insight and impulse, I feel poised at the threshold, ready to cross into the next phase of awakening. The subtle solidity beneath uncertainty suggests a forging of something new, an energy that is neither borrowed nor lost but patiently reclaimed. Though the destination remains just out of view, the unfolding becomes its own kind of answer, a living testimony to the power of persistent engagement and expansive presence. And in this space I stand, open, alert, and ready for what comes next. I can feel the weight of all these discoveries settling into me, not as a burden, but as a quiet invitation to live differently. There's something profound in realizing that what once dimmed inside wasn't lost forever, but simply waiting for me to pause, to look away from distractions, and to listen deeply to my own truths. In that moment of clarity, I understood that vitality is not a flame to be lit by external achievements or fleeting motivation. It is a pulse that resonates within, shaped by the choices we make, often without noticing. The gentle act of reclaiming power becomes an act of rebellion, not against others, but against the inertia that quietly seeps into our lives and stifles our natural momentum. I recall the times I tried to force myself to become something else entirely, thinking transformation required a total rewrite of who I am. But real awakening didn't demand a new identity. It asked me to strip away the layers of self-doubt and habitual retreat that had taught me to settle for less. I began to see that every hesitation and every temptation to numb was an echo of learned survival, not a reflection of my true nature. Once the fog lifted enough to recognize the difference, I found my energy emerging, not as a sudden blaze, but as a steady, enduring current ready to carry me forward. There were moments when the lure of comfort felt irresistible, pulling me toward ease and away from effort. I remember wrestling with that silent offer, "Stay where you are, rest a bit longer." There was resistance in my heart but also tenderness, a part of me longing to be understood, not beaten. Instead of pushing harder or pretending those feelings weren't valid, I invited the tension into my awareness. I embraced discomfort not simply as a barrier, but as a doorway inviting me to step fully into life's rawness, unpredictability, and grit. In doing so, I found strength that didn't depend on invulnerability but grew from acceptance and courage woven together. It struck me how often I had mistaken avoidance for safety, not realizing how surrendering to convenience could quietly erode the foundation I stood on. Much like a tree that leans away from persistent winds, I had shifted away from the storms of confrontation and intensity, believing that growth demanded only calm. Yet, the soil of transformation proved to be far richer when stirred by discomfort than when left undisturbed. Each intentional step into unease reactivated dormant parts of myself, parts vibrantly alive and eager to claim space again. Those steps weren't leaps of faith but measured acts of presence, breathing into tension and letting it teach me resilience rather than fear. I remember a late evening when the city lights flickered against the dark sky, and I sat alone on my balcony feeling the rhythm of my own heartbeat syncopate with the distant hum. The silent pulse whispered of a dormant power, an energy waiting not for perfect conditions, but for honest moments of courage. It was humbling to recognize that power is neither reckless nor relentless but patiently persistent. It doesn't chase after noise or distraction but chooses to ground itself in steady intention and openness. That night, the resting quiet taught me that our inner fire is most enduring not when flaring wildly, but when nurtured with care and faith in gradual renewal. I found myself drawn to stories of others who, like me, had wandered through shadows of hesitation before stepping into light. There is a profound solidarity in shared struggle that softens isolation and fuels determination. Through these connections, I realized courage is less an individual act and more a collective rhythm, a shared heartbeat breaking the silence of resignation. We all possess the threads of strength and vulnerability intertwined. Recognizing this mosaic invites compassion, not only for ourselves but for others who are also seeking to reclaim their wholeness. Now, as I prepare to move forward, I carry a new awareness. Growth will never be a straight path or a once-and-for-all victory. Instead, it pulses like seasons in the land, sometimes swelling with abundance, other times retreating into quiet rest, yet always returning with renewed force. Acceptance becomes the ground beneath my feet, resilience the shield in my hand, and curiosity the compass that guides each step. I do not promise perfection or ease, but a commitment to presence and honest engagement with the complex, often messy, contours of living. I offer this reflection not as a sermon but as a shared breath between reader and writer, a gentle nudge to meet yourself right where you are, without judgment or hurry. Perhaps the moment you look inward with kindness and resolve marks the first step toward reawakening that vitality tucked away beneath layers of quiet withdrawal. And in that tender beginning, I sense the ripple of possibility, the unfolding of a life reclaimed, not by force, but by the grace found in gradual awakening and steadfast intention. So now, I ask myself, am I willing to embrace the discomfort that beckons growth? Am I ready to sit with uncertainty rather than flee from it? The answer, I believe, lies in the small choices we make every moment, in facing the whispers of hesitation with gentle resolve and inviting the vibrant pulse of life to rise again. This journey is ours to unfold, one breath, one step, one awakening at a time.